You've been lied to over and over in magazines and movies, and yes, even in the bedroom. But today, I'm giving you the biological truth about size that every man should hear and every woman secretly knows, but rarely ever says out loud. Let's strip this idea down to the truth. Biology doesn't lie, but society often does. When it comes to the subject of male size in romantic or sexual relationships, biology has consistently shown us that the actual science of female pleasure has very little to do with inches, and far more to do with nuance, how a woman's body responds, how her mind engages, and how emotionally present the connection is. And yet, the conversation about size still dominates locker rooms, comment sections, and sadly, even intimate spaces. This obsession is not driven by biology, but by ego, by media influence, and by a persistent insecurity that's been passed from man to man, reinforced by unrealistic standards and incomplete information. From a biological standpoint, the female reproductive anatomy is not built to prize size in the way pop culture suggests. The truth is, the first 2 to 3 inches of the vaginal canal contain the majority of the nerve endings that are responsible for sexual sensation. That means, regardless of whether a man is above or below the so-called average, the most pleasure-sensitive areas are already well within reach. The clitoris, which is often overlooked in these conversations, is actually the powerhouse of female pleasure, and interestingly, most of its structure is internal. That's right. What you see externally is only a small fraction of the clitoral network, which extends deep into the body and has over 8,000 nerve endings, more than any other part of the human body. That's not just a detail, that's biology telling us where the real focus should be. To put it plainly, biology has engineered women to respond more to touch, rhythm, pressure, and emotional context than to the size of any one body part. And yet, many men waste years worrying about whether they measure up, sometimes literally, while completely missing the far more impactful areas that make them unforgettable to a woman. If biology were so rigid that size determined satisfaction, then every well-endowed man would automatically be an exceptional lover. But we all know through lived experience and honest conversations that this simply isn't true. Some of the most disappointing experiences women have shared have come from men who believed that size was enough and didn't bother to develop any other skill. Let's also talk about depth and tension, something biology explains beautifully but is rarely discussed openly. The female body isn't static, it adjusts. The vagina is elastic, meaning it can accommodate a wide range of sizes, but that also means it needs more than just physical presence. It needs emotional stimulation and arousal to actually contract, expand, and respond fully. In fact, when a woman is not mentally or emotionally engaged, her body is less likely to be physically responsive, regardless of how big the man is. That's why connection matters so much more. A man who understands this knows that mental stimulation, anticipation, tenderness, and confidence are not optional. They are essential. Consider the case of two partners. One man who boasts about size, believing that alone will satisfy her, and another who's attentive, curious, and tuned in to her body's rhythms. Time and again, women gravitate to the second man. Why? Because he's operating from biological awareness, not bravado. He knows that breathing patterns, skin sensitivity, eye contact, and emotional safety create deeper arousal and satisfaction than any exaggerated anatomy. He understands that the real fit between two people isn't just physical, it's emotional, intellectual, and chemical. There are also hormonal elements at play. During arousal, a woman's body releases oxytocin and dopamine. These are bonding hormones that reinforce emotional intimacy and amplify pleasure. But here's the catch. These hormones are released more intensely when the experience is emotionally fulfilling, when there's genuine affection, emotional connection, or even just vulnerability. This completely flips the script on the idea that performance is about size. Instead, it becomes about presence. And presence is something any man can cultivate, regardless of what's beneath his belt. Even the idea of deep pleasure is often misunderstood. Many women report that too much depth or pressure can actually be uncomfortable without proper build-up or emotional preparation. So, the fantasy that more is better becomes not only false, it becomes counterproductive. What biology shows us is that communication, pacing, and sensitivity are what lead to maximum enjoyment, and these are traits that can be developed, practiced, and refined, not inherited. There's also the psychological aspect, often overlooked in this conversation. When a man is overly concerned about size, he often brings that insecurity into the bedroom, and whether he realizes it or not, that energy affects everything. His focus shifts from her experience to his performance. His anxiety can make him rush, overcompensate, or avoid real intimacy. But when a man embraces biological truths, he steps into the bedroom with confidence born not from comparison, but from knowledge. He knows what matters, and more importantly, he knows how to focus on it. Biology doesn't support the idea that bigger is better. Biology supports the idea that better is better, and better, in this case, means smarter, more emotionally intelligent, more attuned. It's not about what you have, it's about what you understand, because women don't remember size the way they remember how you made them feel in the moment. Their bodies are wired to remember connection, not just contact. There's a deep-seated narrative, ingrained into the male psyche from adolescence, that tells men they need to measure up, literally. From the unsolicited advertisements online promising enlargement, to the suggestive jokes in pop culture, to the locker room comparisons that begin far too early, men are fed the idea that their value is directly tied to their size. This misconception is not just widespread, it's damaging, because it shifts a man's focus away from his connection with a woman and turns it inward, towards a persistent insecurity about whether he's enough. The problem with this size obsession is not just that it's inaccurate, it's that it keeps men from realizing the true qualities that make them incredible partners. And ironically, while men are silently worrying about their dimensions, women are wishing they'd just show up more emotionally, communicate more clearly, and understand their bodies more deeply. This myth didn't come from nowhere. The media has done a phenomenal job of amplifying it. In movies, in adult content, in music, there's a glorification of large size that's often portrayed as the gold standard of masculinity. Rarely do these portrayals include what intimacy really looks like, the slow build of anticipation, the exchange of trust, the emotional nuance that unfolds when two people are attuned to each other. No, what's glorified is a kind of mechanical, exaggerated, and often unrealistic display that centers performance over presence. The result? Men start believing that if they don't possess a certain physical trait, they're automatically disqualified from being desirable. Women, on the other hand, are often left unfulfilled, not because of anyone's size, but because their needs are being ignored in favor of outdated stereotypes. Let's unpack that with an example. Two men, same woman, entirely different outcomes. The first man is well endowed, physically confident, but he leans on that one feature as if it's enough. He doesn't take the time to understand her rhythm, doesn't ask questions, doesn't slow down to observe her signals. It's a one-way performance. The second man isn't as physically gifted by traditional standards, but he listens, he watches, he communicates. He's attentive to her breathing, her movements, the pauses between her words. He adjusts, responds, and creates safety. Guess which one she remembers? Guess which one she calls back? The second man, every single time. Because in intimacy, being seen, heard, and felt is far more powerful than any anatomical measurement. There's also a level of irony to the whole size obsession. Many women will privately confess, and studies back this up, that extreme size is not always a benefit. In fact, it can be uncomfortable or even painful without proper preparation and communication. The most sensitive parts of the female anatomy, like the clitoris and the first few inches inside the vaginal canal, don't require deep penetration to be stimulated. They require precision, patience, and variation. Yet somehow, this gets completely lost in the male-centric dialogue about size. The reality is, many women don't care about size nearly as much as they care about how a man touches them, how he makes them feel, and whether or not he's genuinely invested in their experience. And let's be honest, this obsession with size doesn't serve men either. It breeds insecurity where there should be confidence. It creates unnecessary comparison and competition, and it encourages a shallow definition of masculinity that reduces an entire human being to one body part. That's not power, that's pressure, and it distracts men from developing the qualities that actually matter: emotional intelligence, self-awareness, compassion, and skill. When a man is fixated on his size, he often misses the point entirely, because women are looking for connection, not perfection. Women notice when a man carries himself with calm self-assurance, when he doesn't need to prove anything, when he listens and adapts and knows that presence will always matter more than performance. Confidence isn't walking into a room thinking you're better than everyone else. It's walking in and not needing to compare yourself to anyone at all. The same goes for intimacy. Confidence in the bedroom isn't about boasting. It's about giving, receiving, and tuning in. Size becomes irrelevant when a man understands the full spectrum of connection. And beyond that, most women understand that real compatibility isn't physical. It's energetic. It's how someone holds your gaze, responds to your touch, or anticipates your needs without you having to say a word. That's the part women talk about to their friends. That's the part they crave when they remember someone. It's the chemistry, the emotional safety, and the sense that this person isn't distracted by ego, but fully present in the moment with them. No one asks how tall the mountain is if the view takes your breath away. When we talk about what truly arouses a woman, what captivates her and makes her body open up to the experience of intimacy, we're not talking about mechanics. We're talking about emotional and psychological triggers, those silent switches deep in her mind and heart that create the space for real, intense connection. While many men have been conditioned to think attraction and arousal are purely physical, the truth is that a woman's most powerful arousal center is not between her legs. It's between her ears, her mind, her imagination, her ability to feel safe, seen, and desired. That is where real intimacy begins. And if a man doesn't understand how to activate these internal levers, then no amount of external effort will take him where he wants to go. You have to remember, unlike most men, women are contextual beings. For a woman to be fully open in any intimate space, there has to be a buildup, not just physical tension, but emotional anticipation, psychological safety, the feeling that she's not just being pursued, but truly chosen. When she senses that, her walls come down, her energy softens, her body responds almost involuntarily. But if she feels rushed, ignored, or objectified, her body won't lie. She may go along with it, but her engagement will be limited because mentally, she's not in the room with you. Let's put this into perspective with a simple example. Imagine two men. The first comes in with what he believes is irresistible confidence. He makes bold moves, doesn't ask questions, doesn't pay attention to subtle signals. He's forward, physical, and convinced he's doing everything right, but he hasn't once checked in with her emotionally. He hasn't read her energy, hasn't built any trust. Her mind is busy calculating, not surrendering. She may comply out of politeness or curiosity, but she won't melt. She won't remember. Now imagine the second man. He's confident too, but in a different way. He doesn't rush. He listens. He notices. He pays attention to the rise in her breath, the stillness in her voice when something matters, the way her eyes linger when she wants more but isn't saying it yet. He knows that arousal is a dance, not a demand. He's attuned, and because he's present with her, not just physically, but emotionally, she lets go. Her body follows her mind and everything shifts. This isn't romantic fluff, it's neuroscience. When a woman feels emotionally connected and psychologically stimulated, her brain releases dopamine, the pleasure chemical that makes her crave more. Add in oxytocin, the bonding hormone released through prolonged eye contact, laughter, or touch, and suddenly the experience becomes multidimensional. Now it's not just physical, it's memorable. That's why a man who can engage a woman on this level doesn't need to overcompensate in other ways. His power isn't in the performance, it's in his presence. Women are also incredibly responsive to emotional availability. Not necessarily vulnerability in a dramatic sense, but honesty, authenticity. A man who can share who he is without fear of appearing weak ignites something primal in a woman: trust. And where there is trust, there is surrender. But when a man is emotionally blocked, too guarded or performative, a woman's body picks up on that. Even if she doesn't say it out loud, she feels it. And instead of relaxing into the experience, she holds back, she analyzes, she detaches. That's the moment you lose her, not because of anything physical, but because you failed to reach her psychologically. Even the way a man communicates desire is a psychological trigger. There's a massive difference between someone who demands and someone who invites. A woman feels that in her bones. She feels it when a man touches her like he's discovering something sacred, not just claiming a prize. She feels it when he speaks with intention, not just routine charm. Words matter, tone matters, and silence, when held properly, speaks volumes. Women crave depth over dominance. They respond to confidence that doesn't try to overpower, but instead chooses to understand. There's also the issue of anticipation, perhaps one of the most underestimated psychological triggers in attraction. A man who knows how to delay gratification, who understands the value of build-up, teasing, and tension, is far more impactful than someone who rushes to the goal. Anticipation stimulates imagination, and imagination, especially in women, is one of the most potent tools for arousal. If she's thinking about you before you even touch her, you've already won. That's the psychological seduction most men overlook. When a man takes the time to study her reactions, to ask meaningful questions, to connect beyond the surface, he becomes unforgettable. Not because he's perfect, but because he knows how to make her feel deeply. It's not about how hard you press, but how deeply you reach. The woman's body responds to what the mind believes is safe, exciting, and worth surrendering to. That's why the emotional and psychological space you create with a woman is far more powerful than anything you could do with technique alone. Confidence. It's a word thrown around so often that it begins to lose its meaning. But when it comes to intimacy, especially with women, confidence takes on a completely different weight. It's not the kind of loud, performative arrogance often confused for masculinity. It's not the man who brags or flexes or dominates the conversation. Real confidence is quiet. It's steady. It doesn't need to be loud because it's grounded in something internal, not external approval. And the most magnetic men are the ones who walk into a room without needing anyone to validate them. They are not seeking to impress. They are comfortable in their own presence. That's the type of confidence that pulls a woman in without a word. In intimate settings, confidence isn't about taking charge blindly. It's about having control without being controlling. That distinction is everything. A confident man doesn't seek to overpower. He seeks to guide. He doesn't try to win her over through force or pressure. He pays attention. He reads her. He creates an environment where she can fully let go, because he's already done the work of anchoring himself. That's what makes him powerful. Not his words, not his physique, but his ability to stay composed in any moment. Because women are constantly scanning for emotional safety, and nothing signals it more than a man who is unshaken by discomfort, patient with the process, and rooted in who he is. Let's look at this through an example. Picture a scenario where a man is with a woman for the first time. Things are escalating, but she pauses, hesitant, unsure. A man who lacks confidence will interpret this pause as rejection. He'll tense up, maybe become defensive, insecure, or try to push past it too quickly. His insecurity now contaminates the moment, but a man with real confidence doesn't flinch. He senses the hesitation and responds with calm curiosity. He slows down. He checks in. He reassures without needing to over-explain. That alone transforms the energy. She feels safer, more seen, more valued. And it's that sense of security that deepens her trust and opens the doorway to true intimacy. Not force, not persistence, but control wrapped in emotional maturity. Confidence is also about pace. Men who are insecure tend to rush. They treat intimacy like a race to the finish, afraid to linger in the unknown, constantly needing affirmation that they're doing it right. But confident men are never in a hurry. They understand that pleasure lives in the space between moments, in the pauses, the anticipation, the stillness that builds desire. They're not afraid of silence. They don't need to fill every moment with movement, because they're not proving anything, they're savoring something. That self-restraint is not weakness, it's power. The ability to hold tension without needing to release it immediately shows a level of inner control that turns women on more than any one act ever could. Control, in the deeper sense, means emotional regulation. A man who loses his temper easily, who becomes reactive when things don't go his way, or who seeks to dominate instead of collaborate, may be strong on the outside, but he's chaotic on the inside. And women feel that. They may not articulate it, but their bodies sense it. It's in the way they hesitate, hold back, or mentally withdraw even if they physically remain. But a man who has mastered himself, his impulses, his emotional waves, his need to be in control, becomes a source of peace. That calm energy, that ability to hold space for her emotions without collapsing into his own, is what earns her full surrender. And surrender is not something women give to just anyone. It is earned through trust, not size, status, or words. There's also the subtle control of attention. A confident man isn't distracted. He's not scattered, jumping between his own thoughts and his partner. He is fully present, locked into the moment. He notices the shift in her tone, the softness of her breath, the way her body tenses ever so slightly. That presence gives him control. Not over her, but over the moment. Because control isn't about managing someone else, it's about managing yourself in a way that makes others feel free in your presence. That's the paradox. Women don't want to be overpowered. They want to be held emotionally and physically in a space where they can relax into themselves. And only a confident man can offer that without letting his ego take the wheel. Confidence is not found in scripted lines, designer clothes, or loud declarations. It's in the way a man carries himself, the way he breathes through tension, the way he adapts instead of panics, and the way he treats every moment, not as something to control, but as something to lead with care. It's a calm hand on her back instead of a forceful push forward. It's eye contact that reassures. It's steady breathing when she's uncertain. It's being able to take charge without taking away her autonomy. And that, more than anything else, is the difference between dominance and depth, between someone who performs and someone who profoundly understands what it means to connect. When people talk about chemistry in a relationship or intimacy that just clicks, what they're really referring to is compatibility. And at the root of compatibility is communication. Most people assume compatibility is about similarities, shared interests, similar habits, or physical attraction. But true compatibility is more than common ground. It's how two people move in rhythm with each other's needs, how well they adapt to each other's energy, and how willing they are to speak up and listen in equal measure. Without communication, compatibility is surface level at best. And when it comes to intimacy, it's not enough to feel physically drawn to someone. You have to be emotionally understood and psychologically safe with them too. Many men underestimate how vital open, honest, and emotionally fluent communication is to a woman's sense of connection. The male-dominated narrative often paints intimacy as a performance, where success is measured by how long you last, how much she reacts, or how adventurous the act was. But none of that matters if the communication beforehand, during, and after is weak or missing. A woman needs to feel like she can express what she likes, what she doesn't, what she's afraid of, what turns her on, and what makes her feel respected. When she senses that her voice matters, that her feedback is welcome and won't bruise a man's ego, that's when compatibility deepens. Not just physically, but emotionally and mentally as well. Let's consider two partners again as a simple example. Both couples are physically intimate. One couple has high sexual tension, but neither talks much before or after. He assumes she's satisfied. She stays silent to avoid conflict or embarrassment. Over time, dissatisfaction builds, but no one addresses it. It becomes a disconnect that bleeds into other parts of the relationship. The second couple, though perhaps not as outwardly passionate at first, makes communication a consistent part of their experience. They ask, they check in, they adjust. When something doesn't work, they speak up without shame. When something feels good, they celebrate it. There's mutual exploration, not expectation. That kind of openness builds trust, and trust becomes a bridge to a deeper kind of chemistry, the kind that doesn't just burn hot, but burns long. Compatibility also shows up in the little unspoken moments, in how someone responds to pressure, how they handle silence, how they navigate conflict. If a man can't have a difficult conversation without getting defensive, or if he shuts down when a woman expresses an emotional need, then the relationship may function on the outside, but inside, it's starved. Real intimacy requires vulnerability from both sides. Compatibility without the courage to communicate is like having the right map but refusing to follow it. It's not enough to want the same destination. You have to talk about how you're getting there, what pace you're moving at, and what detours need to be made along the way. In the bedroom, compatibility becomes even more nuanced. Every woman is different. Her preferences, her sensitivities, her pace. It all varies depending on her personality, her past, and her mood in the moment. A man who approaches every woman with a fixed script or technique, no matter how successful it was before, isn't being compatible. He's being mechanical. Compatibility requires adaptability, and adaptability is only possible through communication. It might be verbal, like asking, "Do you like this?" or "Tell me what you want." Or it might be physical, like slowing down when her breath changes or shifting when her body stiffens. A woman feels safest and most alive in a space where she doesn't have to explain everything, but also isn't punished for doing so when she wants to. That balance between intuitive awareness and open dialogue is what makes a man unforgettable. Not because he's perfect, but because he's attuned. There's also something to be said about nonverbal communication, how a man's presence speaks for him before he ever opens his mouth, the way he touches her, the way he looks at her, the energy he brings into the room. Women are extremely responsive to emotional undercurrents. If a man walks into a space with unresolved anger, insecurity, or entitlement, she'll feel it. She may not be able to name it immediately, but her body will react. Compatibility, then, also requires inner alignment. A man who is emotionally grounded and clear in his intent allows her to relax, to trust, to mirror that clarity in her own body. That's a kind of communication that goes beyond language. It's energetic, and it can't be faked. What most men need to realize is that communication isn't just about saying what you want, it's about being brave enough to ask what she needs. It's being able to hold space when her answer surprises you, challenges you, or even corrects you, and it's being man enough to adjust without making her feel guilty for speaking up. Compatibility is found in the willingness to co-create an experience instead of trying to control it. Communication is the tool that makes that co-creation possible, and without it, no amount of physical attraction or sexual ability will ever sustain real connection. There's a quiet truth that most men overlook. What women actually want has almost nothing to do with what men are traditionally taught to value. For decades, the world has sold a certain image, that women are drawn to grand displays of power, impressive physical attributes, and dominant energy that fills the room. But when you speak to women honestly, off the record, away from the performance, and outside of the pressure to please, you'll hear something completely different. What women truly crave is connection. It's the feeling of being understood without having to over-explain, the subtle but powerful sense that she is emotionally and energetically safe with someone. That doesn't mean she doesn't enjoy desire, attraction, or physical excitement. It means those things feel empty without a deeper foundation beneath them. What women actually want is to be chosen, not just desired, but intentionally chosen. There's a difference. Desire is reactive. It's based on looks, curves, fantasy. But being chosen means a man sees more than the surface. He sees the way her mind works. He hears her when she says something quietly that matters to her. He remembers the details she never thought anyone would catch. That kind of attention makes a woman feel more naked than any physical touch ever could. Because it says, I'm not just here for what you give me, I'm here for who you are. And once a woman feels that level of presence from a man, everything about her opens up. Her guard lowers, her body softens, her energy expands. She becomes not just receptive, but responsive, and that responsiveness is where the real magic lives. Women want depth, not just the illusion of it, not a rehearsed persona of a deep guy who knows how to talk about emotions in vague poetic terms, but real depth, the kind that comes from a man who's done his work, who knows his own emotional landscape, who can sit with her in silence without making her feel like she needs to entertain him. Women want someone who is grounded, who can weather her moods without becoming reactive, someone who sees her emotional waves not as problems to be solved, but as invitations to get closer. She doesn't want a fixer, she wants a witness. Someone who will stay present, even when she's messy, unsure, or too much. Because being too much is a fear so many women carry in secret, shaped by a lifetime of being told to shrink their feelings, to dial down their intuition, to not take up space. Women also want to be desired in a way that feels human, not performative. There's a difference between a man who touches her because he's going through the motions of what he thinks intimacy is supposed to look like, and a man who touches her with intention, curiosity, and reverence. The former makes her feel like an object. The latter makes her feel like a muse. And contrary to popular belief, reverence doesn't mean worshiping her or putting her on a pedestal. It means seeing her as a full, complex being whose pleasure, comfort, and inner world are just as important as his own. It's about reciprocity, mutual investment, a shared space where both people get to show up whole, not as fragments or performances. Let's take a real-world example. Two men both take a woman on a date. The first is charming, says all the right things, makes her laugh, and clearly wants to impress her. But the conversation never leaves the surface. He's not curious about her story, not asking questions that show he's truly engaged. The night feels good, but forgettable. The second man isn't flashy, but he pays attention. He follows up on small things she mentioned weeks ago. He listens when she talks about her childhood without shifting the conversation back to himself. He doesn't try to rush the connection, but he also doesn't hold back emotionally. She walks away from that date, not just feeling attracted, but seen. That's the man she thinks about when she's lying in bed. That's the one who stays on her mind, because he created an experience that went beyond the surface. What women want is to feel emotionally safe enough to surrender, intellectually stimulated enough to stay intrigued, and physically desired enough to feel cherished. And all of that requires a man who knows that intimacy is not something you take, it's something you build. Women want a man who knows how to make her feel like she can be soft in a world that constantly demands she be strong. A man who recognizes that her beauty isn't just in her body, but in her boundaries, her passions, her contradictions. The kind of man who makes her feel like she doesn't need to shrink or censor herself to be loved. That's not just attractive, that's unforgettable.